Buonasera, benvenuti.
Good evening, and welcome. We're here with Professor Vittorino Andreoli. And this, in itself, is a presentation, but actually, I would like to add a few words about him. I would like to talk first and foremost about the book which I'm still completing, which is How I Run Through Time. And it's his autobiography. One particular part interested me, that is to say, the beginning, when Andreoli was not yet a clinical psychiatrist, but was a researcher. And he was doing fundamental research, which then gives clinical results. But you have to start from far away to get to the anti-clinical results. And this is what Vittorino Andreoli was doing with Professor Trabucchi at the time. And that's when he started carrying out an extremely important project, because now I'm going to say another word which is not new to you, because he was involved in serotonin. It's a neurotransmitter which is extremely important. First of all, it has some nicknames. It's called the molecule of happiness, or the joie de vivre, and this will also introduce us to this evening's topics. But it, as a fundamental research, is even more interesting because it's a molecule that changes its function according to where it goes to position itself. This is one of the discoveries Professor Andreoli made. He also discovered how this mechanism works. So, for example, amongst neurons, it is exchanged in synapses. There is a molecule that is emitted from one neuron that excites another neuron, and therefore transmits a signal that goes to another neuron, and then is recaptured by the first neuron. It's like a ping-pong game. This is one of the fundamental mechanisms of our lives. It's a hidden mechanism in our brain, which Andreoli explored when there were two different types of psychiatry that were going to compare each other and confront each other. One was the traditional one with straitjackets and sometimes physical violence, and the other one known as anti-psychiatry, which probably went a bit too far in the other direction, while rightly opposing the first, denying madness and considering madness as part of normality and vice versa. Cooper, for example, and the other major American anti-psychiatrists thought that way. I mean, they were good because they helped dismantle the ancient mental asylums, but went too far. In Italy, we had someone who was very balanced. He was called Basaglia in Trieste, who worked on anti-psychiatry, but with that right level of aggressiveness, but also moderation, which was necessary to complete it, but also on a legal term, the law, that was greatly contrasted and probably is not perfect, could be improved, but which I would only like people who are really knowledgeable to change it in Parliament. This law, I was saying, changed the situation of psychiatry in Italy. But why? Because Basaglia also knew how to use drugs very well, those drugs which Andreoli was fine-tuning with his fundamental research. So here you see how these various projects intertwine, and even though they're very different, they come closer on tissues, and maybe not maybe not human tissues, but animal tissues. Mice are used, and this is a revolution, a bit like the Basaglia law, but this is not what we're going to be talking about this evening. We're going to be talking about a new word which corresponds to a new idea, a new way of seeing human beings and the world. Apparently, it looks like a mistake because it's called benessere, which is like saying well-to-be instead of well-being. The floor to you.
Dottor Bianucci, mi permetta prima di salutare.
Bianucci, first of all, I want to welcome the audience and thank them for being here. Thank the organizers of this series of events, which I have attended a number of times with you, which has become for me also a sort of appointment. Because researchers, those who are involved in complex topics, at times need to become more aware or be aware of oneself, which is one of the features of humans as compared to others on the evolutionary tree. I'm very pleased to come to this city, which you know I love. This evening, I would like to say that words too need a revolution. I remember Benedetto Croce, the philosopher, who used to say that words are essential to express a thought. I don't know if it's still philosophically acceptable, but I like it, and the relationship between thought and language is important. You see, one of the words that more often we hear is well-being. And it's something that is a defense mechanism because it expresses the fact that we are not well. It's as if it were hope. But benessere, well-being, and I'm talking about words, doesn't tell us exactly what it means. So we load it or charge it with meanings, with semantic meanings, according to the time. While well-being can also be written as well-to-be. Your computer, in this case, will not draw a red line underneath it, excuse me. So I like well-to-be much better than well-being because it expresses the meaning through the two semantic roots, well and to be. It means that you are good, you're well. Now, this, when you use it, expresses, maybe unconsciously, the fact that we'd like to be a bit better, the fact that we'd like to be in the world, but to be so in a good manner. In this way, we realize that we have a vision of life which is very cumbersome. And in Turin, we should remember the book which was written by the famous Turin authors, which became Il bene di vivere, which is how well you live, but this turns into Leopardi's difficulty of living. And as you know, the author committed suicide one day in August from the Hotel Roma. So, well to be and bad to be, if you'll allow the pun, is the need to overcome the concern, the worry, the anxiety, which is widespread, as if it has lost the notion of illness, because a disease that becomes a norm is no longer bad, it's a standard. So, well-being means that we would all like to be well, and today there are at least 120 different techniques which are suggested if you want to feel well. Diets, wellness, using your body, gym, right up to those Oriental disciplines which are so interesting and which are called meditation, the fact that one abandons passions and also concerns. These are all very empirical, and I respect them, by the way, but on the whole, there's someone who knows of her friend who does something and she suggests that you should join her, and then there's another one. That is to say, there is a maze of these remedies which seem to be solutions to spend your life in a slightly happier way. So well-being, wellness, well-to-be, which is a new word. It means that you've maintained the roots, the semantic roots, because we want to be in this world and we want to be in the best way possible. And this is why I will be talking about desire and wish, because this is the yardstick. It depends on the type of desire, of wish, of drives that we have, whether you feel further away or closer to the goal you wish to attain. So I thought, because living among people, I'm not a theoretician, I can't produce theories, but I try, and sometimes I'm successful in understanding what people need. And increasingly I hear people saying, "Professor, what can I do to live a bit better, because my children worry me. I can't communicate with my children." You know what I tell them? You know what I tell women who are in the kitchen? I said, send a text message, because they must answer a text message, otherwise they feel guilty. But if you say, come to talk to me, they don't. Send text messages. It's a bit of a game, but it's very difficult with children. The future looks bleak. It doesn't seem to have no future. It's as if the world were living as if there were no tomorrow. And this is the empirical approach. What about couples? Relationships are increasingly unstable. The financial crisis, all of it. There is a general condition which creates fear. So they ask me, what can I do to feel a bit better, to live a bit better, to be better? And they mean here and now, because it's so strong that you can't say in 6 months. Here the scientific answer must be give a solution here and now, because there is no time. Faced with being unwell, you have loneliness, depression, this escape from a time where you fail to participate, because well-being, well-to-be is not history, it's not a statue, but it's the relational part of our lives. A human being is not an object, but each one of us is a story in themselves, therefore a relationship with the others. Relationships which then become a memory, and therefore it's as if energy disappeared. And everything became very dark. This is wealth. For 55 years, I've been working as a psychiatrist for 55 years, and I studied to become one. The first few years, I worked in research, but it was mainly because I was interested in human beings. You were recalling, Dr. Bianucci, those pages. You know, in those labs, I was working on those molecules. There's a lot to think. If you do research, I had to wait for a centrifuge to complete its circle. It was the fastest was in Cambridge, and it lasted 2 hours. And there you are waiting. So I was thinking of this molecule and of mad patients. a fragment of a brain or a human being. And you know that at a certain point when it seemed that I was going to stay in a lab forever, I ran away and I went from Harvard to the Verona Mental Health Institution because I was fascinated by human being. I was fascinated by what being human means. So these people tell me, I'm not even worried, say they were depressed. If another episode of depression will happen, but it's now. It's to go home, to relate with my children, to live without the fear of the future. Hence, the will to say well-being, well-to-be, which means it's something new. And I don't mind that it might seem a mistake or a typo, because there are lots of mistakes in the present that seem to be truth. So you see, the fact that a spelling mistake might become a paradox is something I don't dislike. Well-to-be is something new, which can be promoted. You can answer that need, but in a scientific manner. And here I must tell you all that as you said, I was in what is called hard science or fundamental science because there's a certain object you have to study. But I always was thinking about, as we were talking about, the things that Piaget in 1955 called les sciences de l'homme, the science of human beings, of man. He said, psychologist, psychiatrist, psycho things, whatever, psychoanalyst, psychotherapist, whatever. We psycho things, we are involved of human beings as a whole, as one. That is what to be is. To be is a human being as a whole. A man can be divided in many parts. There's specializations, heart, liver, whatever. All those fragments, all those bits of human being. But there are some subjects that have to study human beings as a whole. This is the being. And it's not so much what will my brain be like, but tell me what I can do now, here and now, to look at things, to relate better with my children, to educate them, because I think that they're lost. Now this, I say, yes, it is true that the word well-being, wellness, but let us create a discipline, a new discipline, a scientific discipline, which will enable us to answer these questions which we all have. And here's another feature. You know, usually a psychiatrist perceives a difference between the needs of their patient and the psychiatrist as a therapist. Well, the word well-to-be involves psychiatrists too. It's as if we were to live in a world today which is difficult. Should we say that the world is undergoing a crisis? I don't think it's only an economic crisis. I think it's an existential crisis, but I don't understand anything about economics. I think the relationship between the human being and the world has become very difficult. Hence, the difficulty of being in the world, but being in the world in a way which is no longer gratifying. So, therefore, I created a new discipline, clearly from a scientific point of view, because this is the MO, the modus operandi, which our civilization has chosen. I'm very fond of our civilization, although it's undergoing a crisis. I have seen other societies, and I know that there are different ones, and that some are full of stimuli which are very important and new. But I am a Western man, and the West progressed through science. So this means that I want a discipline, I want a subject matter which will be separate from medicine. And here again, medicine, I am part of that world, of course, and it's the science which has made it possible for us to double our life span since the Second World War. We've doubled our life expectancy. It means that we have overcome certain obstacles. Think, for example, childbirth in the past, or childhood infections, or mothers dying of infection. Think of what penicillin and Fleming have done. Now, given that, medicine has that characteristic, and now you stimulated me on words, but medicine is involved in treating diseases. And in Italian, that is malattia, which in its stem contains male, which means evil, bad. So this means that medicine involved in treating symptoms of which are the names of the diseases which have attacked the body. Medicine does not deal with a human being as a whole. You go to a specialist for a particular part. So we fragmented this human being. Medicine is involved in the things that don't work in a human being, in a part of the human being, the joints, or the body is a system. It could be the liver, it could be the brain, it could be anything. It could be the blood system, the lungs, whatever. So the task that medicine has is to remove what doesn't work. And the other task is also to prevent. But the reference is always the symptom, and medicine follows that logic. There are symptoms. We must move from symptom to diagnosis, which is never part of one symptom, but a series of symptoms put together. And once you've identified the disease, then you try and find what tools you have available to fight it. Well-being, or well-to-be, on the other hand, is first of all promotes being well and of being, therefore, as a human being as a whole. I don't know if this is clear. So what I'm saying is that the track has been laid. You must strengthen it. We must have more medical research. And I would like to remind you, I don't know if you've invited him, a friend of mine who died a few days ago, Veronesi, who was studied breast cancer. He wanted to remove that disease. Now, with this track that is clear, that has many names, Professor Veronesi that we mentioned and many others, I would like to start to lay another track which goes in the same direction and which we will see has many crossover points, but which basically has a dimension, has an object, a whole being, and not a part of his or her body, and whose aim is that not to remove illness, but to promote well-being. Is it to just play on words? No, because people today are asking to be able to stay, at least to be better, to live in a better situation, to be in a better situation, a situation which is better than what it was. This is something that is written in books, my books too, which you can read, but I started from an idea and with a distinction which I would like you to focus on. That is the distinction. Well, I spoke about the joie de vivre, the joy of living, which is juxtaposed to the work, to the cumbersomeness of living. And this too must not seem strange, because a psychiatrist who wrote a very beautiful book on the visions of the world, Carl Jaspers, and he wrote about the visions, the Weltanschauungs of the world. He was a very good psychiatrist, and he distinguished between the fact that each one of us is conditioned by the choice, whether it is aware or not, of having chosen one Weltanschauung rather than the other. And the two juxtapose them are the ones of the joie de vivre, or the difficulty of living. And he gives a description which we find in each one of us. And here I must confess something. When I wrote this book, which is part of this series of the foundation of this new science that I said, you, Vittorino, that's me, have you got joie de vivre? Do you like living? No, I'm tragic. Greek tragedies I loved when I was young. Then, as you saw, my father built bridges, and I said, I want to deal with mad people. Then, when I was a student, and on a Sunday, I used to go to the mental asylum, and I used to bring them home with my mother, who never saw me bringing a young girl home, but only mad people. And then I started to work in a mental asylum, and I was conquered by it because of its lack of humanity. I still remember it when I went to San Giacomo della Tomba, which was the mental asylum in Verona. When the director was taking me to pavilion 1 to 5, he said, this person here is from number 4, which means he was a bit better than the people in number 5, but he was much worse than the people in number 3. You don't have to say, well, he's a number 3. And you said everything. When I saw that disaster, that human disaster, finish the round, 5 different pavilions, 5 for the men and 5 for the women, he said to me, this director, because I said I would like to be a psychiatrist, but I'd like to see, he said, after this tour, you still want to be a psychiatrist? And I said, Professor, now I can but be a psychiatrist, because what I was really hit by was the human disaster. So I said, here, maybe I can do something. And I was quite happy with that, because that was enough. You needed everything there. So I then, as a psychiatrist, I was called the psychiatrist of the extreme cases, because if there were any light cases, I used to send them to my assistant. I like the hardcore cases. What about the criminals? I then became a criminologist. The prosecutors would call me and say, Professor, you can't say no to me this time, because he says, I said, what happened? He said, murder, 95 knife wounds. And I used to say, and what? And what else? This, please excuse me, mine is a rather jocular way of dealing with dramatic situations. So I used to say, you write of the joy of living, of the joie de vivre, because at this particular historical moment, in this present time, we have to change our glasses to start seeing the world, which I can't see changing in the short term. I know there are people who believe so, and I hope that they will do it and do it properly, but I haven't. I have hope, but I don't really hold them in great esteem. Now, so we have to start to have a vision of the world which is different, because everything is leading us to show us how heavy living is rather than well-being. Well, first of all, is that we live mostly out of the past and the future. That is to say that we're very strongly tied to all the things that not that we did, to all the things that we haven't done or we didn't do in the past. I'm old now, you see, but happy to be old, by the way. I have no wish to be a youngster. You know that the youngster is, well, there are some people that I would call youngsterists. They're old, but they'd like to be young, so they buy tight jeans and a T-shirt, the one which, in fact, their grandchild should be wearing. And I can't say it to this audience, and then they use a shell which they put, I'm not going to tell you where, the audience, because he is very refined, which they put somewhere to show that they've got a lot and there's nothing left. I am old and I want to live this chapter of my life. It's a new chapter, and I can guarantee, and I repeat this quite often, Dr. Bianucci, because they say that we're very expensive, so we have to be thrown away. But I guarantee you that to throw me away, they're going to have to work a hell of a lot. And they won't succeed. In any case, basically, the difficulty of living, it's as if we were referring to our life to a ghost of the past, which is the memory of what we did not do, what we failed to do, or in a future which no longer exists, which maybe will exist, but we escape, we run away from the present. And if you look at our culture, the culture that, for example, in my city, Verona, look at the agricultural culture. It's always on the future and on the past. So you never live the present. We're never, ever concerned of what is happening here, which means the relationship with your child today. Did you phone today to say, you know, I'm really sick of being in the hospital? I was not only with mad people, but with psychiatrists, and I can't stand psychiatrists. Please wait for me because I really want to see you today, now. What have you got to say to me? Nothing. I just want to spend some time with you. Well, there's always this excessive work. We go home, and at home there's silence. Then I put the television on. Silence. Because I am so tired, I'm exhausted. Now there's in a country where we're all exhausted and the country is going to pieces. Well, don't do anything for a while. Maybe things will be better. We're all tired. We're not living. At home we don't find anyone. So what is the joie de vivre? It means living the present. It means realizing that, yes, autumn is here, spring is here, flowers. I want to be trivial here, because life is trivial. In that book, which you mentioned, at a certain point, I tell a story. I say that I like to complain. Complaining, I like it. My wife and my children usually are the recipients, but there's also a time to complain. There are, well, Jeremiah, for example. I'd like to be there. I'd like to be like Jeremiah. Job. What about Vittorino? I know that Jeremiah, Job, and Vittorino doesn't really sound good, but life is that. Life is part of feelings, emotions. Life is made up of little things while we look at the future. And then we look at the faces of power. And we forget that there are also the Mr. Nobodies. You know, the nobodies. The nobodies are the people who are there, but it's as if they weren't there. That is why, as well as going to the big cities, I also like to go where there is a hidden humanity, which is the real grandiosity of this country. Mr. Nobody might include a neighbor, ourselves, while everybody every day has to get up and look at the powerful, the strong and powerful. So, this is a not living. The wise person enjoyed what is here and now, the sun, the dear person or the people he or she loves that are close to them, that maybe didn't hit the headlines, but still have feelings. You see, Dr. Bianucci, think of that problem, and I would like all of you to think of it too. Apparently, we express our aggressiveness, anger and aggressiveness, especially with the people we're fond of. Is that ever possible? We go home and we unload all those frustrations, and then in the end it becomes difficult for us to deal with the everyday problems which are and our complaints. A journalist said to me, "Professor, excuse me, but don't you find it ridiculous that a person like you should complain?" No, it's not ridiculous, because human beings are ridiculous. A very good journalist, by the way. Think of you this morning when you were in your underpants. Were you not ridiculous? A journalist in his underpants. Well, being ridiculous is also important. The idea is that we have to, in fact, I am talking about everyday life. The joie de vivre is the ability to dwell on things that possibly haven't got a general dimension, but which for us represent points of reference, hallmarks. There are great heroes and there are small heroes. And here I have to think of my father, who is no longer with us. He was my little hero. He was the person with whom he looked at me and he understood things and I understood things. They know that then the old people also have the right to remember and also to be moved. You mustn't be afraid of being moved. Think of the fact that my father, every now and again, I was already a professor by then, and every now and again they would call me. I was going out, they're saying, "Look, there's your father. He must speak to you." And I was saying, "What's the matter?" He was saying, "Vittorino, you must comb your hair." Well, he thought that this was to be done. And I said, "You calling me because of that?" Because he maybe looked at me from the window and he said, he's a professor, but he doesn't comb his hair. This is life, because these small things are important, because our small story should not become a part of the present. We are all a small story. We're therefore linked to the others, to those who preceded us, but also to those who will follow us. Now, the being, to be, should not be considered in a static manner, static as in a statue. It's dynamic, and it's within the furrow of our history compared to the great events with which we open every day. All this, it pales away, ridiculous, but this too is important, because this enriches us of experience and our feelings, our bonds, our life. So the joie de vivre is a way in which you can look at the world and to perceive oneself. This is the vision, and I want to follow to answer the question, the important question on well-to-be. I thought that to answer the needs that everyone has, because I like to remind you the fact that medicine is for those who are ill, but the drive to feel better concerns everyone. So we're like this because we see the world in a different way. It's a lens through which we see it. Do you remember that Kant used to say, we will never know what reality is, what the world is, but we know it as we see it. And if two people enter a space for the first time, they see one thing, the other person might see others. Why? Because there is a focus, there is a different awareness, there is an individual perception which make it possible for a person to relate to a relational or geographical setting in a different manner. And this is what we have to focus on. While all our culture tries to channel us on certain things, and therefore we see only those. Each one of us talks about the same things. So we should leave that possibility to discover and be amazed, to marvel of ourselves and of the place where we are. Therefore, also to know and sometimes to close with the situation. Think of these are wonderful tools. Television, for example, was and is internet, but the latest survey says that teenagers, the older teenagers, spend 6 hours a day in front of internet. That extraordinary tool has become the guide. That is to say, we're not using our network, that's our brain network, but we're using the other network. And even today I was seeing on the train, they all, even when they take their phones with them all the time, I was observing, they go to the toilet with their mobiles, and I was saying to my wife, Laura, you'll see that the first automatic thing is that the phone will have to pee now. So at this point I say that we have to leave this free to small things, and above all, and I'm telling you that the well-to-be must be part of a joie de vivre. That's the first general outlook. And believe me that the joie de vivre is the joy that everybody can attain. And allow me to say, joie doesn't depend on money. And that's good news, because it is no longer possible that everything should be measured with money. An example, just one example. You're already thinking of Christmas presents, because I can see stalls everywhere in Turin. It's important because it's a positive gesture. But there's the problem. Which present? It has a cost, it's an object. So you always buy one, but you would have liked to have bought another one if you'd had more money, because it was more important, therefore more meaningful in giving it. And then so little packets which try, and all the ribbons, which are very beautiful things, but there is a present which you can give, but you can also have as well as a present, you can have a gift, and the gift is part of yourself. And in giving, it's also very beautiful. It's beautiful giving something, but also to saying, I will give you this of me, you can count on me. A gift is something extraordinary, and you can see it in the world. For example, forgiveness contains the word give, very beautiful. Pardon as with the donus in Latin, and when I was able to forgive, I'm not sure that everything can be forgiven, but that's not the issue today. But when you forgive, that gives you joy, that gives you gratification. I guarantee you know it probably. Do it. It's very beautiful. Forgive. To give. Forgive. And this is an example. Very trivial example, but you never think of it. We have been overloaded by other things. So if you have no idea that you can give something of yourself to the other, then clearly Christmas can become very sad because the present that you were able to buy is small and not big enough. But give. Think that what you can give. What you can give a child. What you can give in relational terms. So the well-to-be has to be framed in the way you are, and it's a vision of the world. It's the possibility to see yourself in a place which also has difficulties, but there are also other things that we don't see. I think that in Turin there are no more swallows, or very few. But the swallows in my youth, and I'm saying something which is, have you seen the robin redbreasts that are arriving now? It's from the north. You say I'm a minimalist. No, I'm a maximalist. I'm not a minimalist. Looking at your neighbors who maybe, who knows, if you, in an apartment block where all enemies were all locked in towers, and if you're not sure, go to a meeting of the block and you'll realize what it can be. There you see a vision of joy. Joy of living, joie de vivre, which means recognizing that the moon we saw a few evenings ago was so beautiful. In Turin it was cloudy, but that didn't change a lot. Yes, but the expectation, the waiting for it, because you don't always have to see everything. When I was tiny, I used to go up to the mountains with my father, and we left early in the morning, and we walked and walked. Where are we going? No, you see. And you go up there, and it was absolutely covered in mist. It was shrouded, but it was, well, we'll come back another time. So this is wanting to see is the expectation of something positive. We have a culture of the enemy. So a person is our enemy unless otherwise proven. So we don't realize how much wonderment and bewilderment and surprise that presumed enemy without there being any reason. And we realize that when we go to the other cultures too. So the joie de vivre. But now, because I don't want to, I would like to say what we do, because then they ask me, Professor, how do you do it? Well, in front of me, there is some. I can't say to a person who comes to me, I wish you to have to be. What I would do with a person who says, Professor, I would really like to be able to be a bit better, to live better, to give. I say, well, first of all, let's do something. I want to explain the difference there is between joy and happiness. and immediately to say it's not something small. I am a joyous, unhappy person. You see, joy is a feeling, a positive feeling of gratification faced with a stimulation, stimulus which gives us something positive, good news, or I don't know, the fact you've been promoted, or whatever. Things that it's satisfying, which is linked to that stimulus. Once the stimulus is gone, it goes. You lose then that feeling of gratification. Happiness concerns the self, and it's the psychology of the self which has generated happiness, because we always talk about happiness and we never talk about joy, the gaudium of the Romans. What is joy? Is something which concerns everyone, which concerns a couple or a family or those friends. It extends, it expands, concerns the community, and it's something that you receive from others too. Joy pertains to the us. So, how do you how can you not worry if your grandchild has a problem? The joy is solving it. So one of the texts where you talk about joy is the gospel. No one ever talks about happiness. And there I'm analyzing it, the gaudium, 28 times. And it always mentions gaudium, the Roman gaudium, because it is the type of happiness that you feel with the other, or you feel for the other person, and it's circular. So that's joy. With that premise, one has to, how do you operate? How do you work? You endeavor to seek what our desires and wills are. It was what we call the quest for desire, or because our ill-being depends on the fact that we have desires or wishes that are not fulfilled, and most are not ours, are not within us, but there's envy, for instance. You envy the other person, and then you want to be or want to have what the other person has, and therefore pursues them and doesn't realize what they are and what they have. So they run after them. Once they've reached them, there's someone else, there's something else, there's the future, tomorrow. While if you say, look at what you've got, look at who you are. So we then move on to desires and wills, wishes. Then you analyze what each one of us has, and not why all our teenagers. I was talking earlier on with some people I know and I'm fond of. While the youngsters have the same desires, and it's sort of spot on, and then it goes like you want that object, while it's seeking something within that you want fulfilled. So you analyze desires and wills, but that's not enough. In that way, you discover possible desires, because if you have an impossible or desire for all their lives, they will be frustrated, and they will end up by projecting, by envying, being angry, being against. There are those who are against everyone, and they don't realize that by so being, they're against themselves first and foremost, because it means that they can't recognize themselves being with the others in this small society. So the analysis of desires, they change obviously with age. So at that point you have a simulation, and you say, well, Let us say, what would happen if, and you show them a world as if that were to happen, what would happen? And you realize that most of what you would want to achieve, in fact, is not a need, an existential need of the person. It's a sort of construct which we have introjected, but which does not belong to us. And the third thing that must be seen is resistance. This is an important point. Clearly, I'm thinking of the youngsters, but it's not only that. I'm also thinking of old people, where you can't do things and you start thinking that it's better to die because you don't understand that even a moment of life is life, and maybe feelings to love for one more minute. That is why death, something when I want to think about it, I always have something else to do because I want to find an excuse for what I have not done. But I must now, then I will have finished. 2 more minutes. And I hope that's possible. You see, in this discipline, if this is a backdrop which will lead us to be together with those who wish to have well-to-be, but there is a principle that makes this possible, and it's a principle which I would call circularity. If you do something for your body, even beauty, not surface beauty, but of the person, of being, but to do something for your body leads to something in the mind, on our psyche, on our psychology, and this acts on relationships. If I'm happy, if I am joyous, I wish to transmit this. So you see, there is a circular approach. It is no longer possible to separate the body from the mind, from social relations, but it's circular. So there are those who have to intervene with the tools of the body, which are not medicines, because there are helps, they're natural, which can help us accept age, for example, because even beauty is important. If you run, you keep your muscles going, your eyes will be more luminous, but all this is not separate from your mind. It's not that you do something for your body and something for your mind. There's a circular effect. There is an effect of shifting from one to the other, of these 3 factors. So there is no juxtaposition between those who on the soma and those who do the more psychological thing on the psyche, or those who have social relationships. It's all one, which enters a circular approach, and this is what gives the well-to-be. That is to say, the feeling of the fact that you've accepted yourself with the limitations, because don't forget, and with this I would just to conclude, that the human condition is fragile. That's our hallmark. It's not weakness. Fragility is knowing that with science we discover lots of things, but how many we still have to discover. And maybe there is something that we will never discover. There's a bit of mystery there that shrouds it. And it's this mystery, these questions that have no answers. This is human fragility. So my fragility needs someone else's fragility. And there's this extraordinary thing, the 2 fragilities together make strength, and this is human life. We are not robots. We are animals, human animals, and we have to respect each other. Why? Because we need the other, but we need the other to live, not to overcome or to win. I say this all the time. For all the years which I mentioned, I worked with the mad people. I use this term, I always use it in an affectionate way. I don't know if I help these mad patients or not. You'd have to ask them. But if I did it, I guarantee you, it's because of my fragility, because I know what being sad means. Sometimes get up and think that you didn't do all the things that were possible. And so it is not depression, but I understand the meaning, the deep human meaning of the depressed person, who would have liked to have done more and feels guilty because they didn't. This is emotional effectiveness approach, an approach which is effective, which is emotional, and it's full of mistakes. We make lots of mistakes. How many mismeasurements we have in the relationship with others, and especially those we love. So this is our condition. This is well-to-be, that we build on a principle of circularity, which tries to produce well, not to eliminate illness or sickness, but that's different. It's a track that goes in the same direction, but I want to build this new track because I have understood that it is possible to promote well-to-be in those who have chronic diseases, and even in those who lives in a hospice. I don't like the hospice as a place because I feel that it's a place where you queue for the end. But even there, that is to say in diseases where unfortunately science has nothing to offer, even there, it is possible to feel that being there, to be there with that joy which is virtually endemic, is there, while happiness is on its own. I've understood even that it is possible to promote wellness, this well-to-be, even in disease. And that proves that there are two different tracks, although they're joined by an arch. So this is my proposal, this is my project, and I hope that each and every one of you will think of the well-to-be and how a new possibility exists, because you can help yourself and help others, but why? Otherwise, we will be dominated in our society by the difficulty in living, and it will be increasingly difficult. There will be less and less drive to live with others and to live it. We are fragile animals, but as no other living species, we have hope, we have deep sentimental bonds. There are some people who love us, and we can express our feelings to the other. And this, I think, is something that we have to see it. You can change glasses, otherwise everything is difficult from the moment we get up in the morning for when we go to sleep for that night until the last time we go to sleep, where we have no longer the possibility of being. You see, psychiatry, well, we need it to be humanistic, of humanity and humanism. Psychiatry which refers to this suffering human being, because we've already said so, madness is a form of sufferance. A form of sufferance with particular features. It's pain, but it's not pain of a part of your body, but it's the pain of existence, of existing. And at this point, therapy, treatment has to become part of humanism. This is why psychiatrists are no longer able to manage a relationship. They need everything to be part of the whole system, to be working, to be active. This is why scientific popularization, and I'm saying it to someone who does it and does it extraordinarily well, that is to say you, is something so important. Here you have to narrate these things. You have to talk about well-to-be to everyone. Well-to-be depends on the understanding, that you can't do things alone. A psychiatrist with a patient needs at the same time to have the family working with them, to have the people who understand what suffering is, who are not afraid. There's no need to be afraid, and you know that. This is the dimension. We have to transform all we do into a major principle, which is the principle of humanity and humanism. This is something which is not oftenly said. It implies that feeling which enables us to live with others, respecting each other, helping each other. So this is what it is, and this is a part of it. But now you gave a very good synthesis. You were asked about wonder and marveling. Well, you know that I wrote this, the sort of story of my life. You usually do it at 80. I thought I did it at 75. And people are going to say, people are probably wondering how old I am. 77. You know, people never know it. The gift of yourself. On the 19th of April of 1940, I was born. I was born because I wanted to see the war. You know that we entered in war in July. So what I am surprised, marveled by, is my own story. To tell your story, I insist on this. When the feelings have a story. Well, if you don't agree, of course you've got to split up. You've got to separate. You can't hurt each other. But you're breaking a story, not just a bond, a story, a history. And the story, that's why you should always tell a story. Here, you should also tell the story of, for example, the Savoy, but your individual story. Tell your story to your grandchildren, because this is what's important. So marvel, amazement is part of a story. To discover what your grandfather did is important. Well, the things that my father did, who on the 25th, he was an anti-fascist, and so he was no longer allowed to build under fascism, so he had to hide. He hid, as I told you many times, in a monk's monastery in Camaldoli. Is it written in the history books? No. But in my story, this is a very important fact. The marvel or the amazement of what we did together, of what you say, you look like so-and-so. It's very beautiful when you see these things, because those are the resemblances that piece a story together. Marvel is for oneself and for others. When I started working as a psychiatrist, when in 1959 I started working in a mental asylum, madness was given by a series of symptoms and therefore of negative elements. Schizophrenic is the person who does not use reason, has not the sense of reality, is dissociated, all negative. And you know what I thought? Is it possible that it's all negative? Let's also see what is positive. And so I had, there were some mad people. You know I used this term, the mad people. And we put them, there was a mad person who used to draw on a wall. And another one said, why? And was trying to stop him. And so we said, let's put tables, let's allow them to draw. And then you went to Paris and you saw the most appreciated works of art were by a mad one. So I seen that a mad person can draw, and the artist said that it was beautiful. This is what marvel and amazement is. I went to a mental asylum, which was a disaster. And then I started to understand that there was the possibility of human things. Madness is human. This is a lot. This is a marvel. This is something we should amaze. Another person from Verona, Cesare Lombroso, that we gave to Turin. Yes, well, who was important and so on. I've tried to turn his positions upside down, but to say you saw the negative aspects. We had the museum to talk about the mistake. Even historical mistakes have a meaning in a historical frame. But I said, yes, of course, here we see a human being. Well, he was behind in the genus, as if the development of this being had stopped. Not only, but we also see that there are skills and ability that are so human that they become creative. So here, this is what we marvel about. When we see, for example, how many people that could have appeared meaningless, but listening to them and spending time with them, also for the treatment, but how many discoveries. I am so amazed by mad people that, you know, I'm happier with mad people than with normal people. But there are not very many normal people, so I'm fine. I'm absolutely fine. You see, the marvel is, the amazing thing is human being with their fragilities, and you don't think of human being, but think of the greatness of giving yourself in love. Think of our small stories. Long-lasting relationships. How many things have we received and we haven't even realized that? Luckily, we have memory, Bianucci, which makes it possible. And you're young, but 5 years younger than the professor. But yes, I live. Allow me to say it. I live more with the dead than with the living, because this memory is the greatness of human beings. Memory, bringing our story, carrying it with us. Sometimes it's poverty, and now people are afraid to say it. But you know, the generations of our grandparents or great-grandparents have hewn life out of stone. You know, this was true in the Venetian area, And there is really blood from stones. This is the marvel. Human beings is what are amazing, even if I know that you must be cautious, but do not lose the pleasure, and the will to amaze yourselves of that human being. And this, sometimes people are scandalized. I said, well, I tried to understand even criminals, major criminals, and I always give the case of Donato Bilancia. He killed 17 people in 6 months, the Genoa case, and I spent days and days. I got him brought to the Venetian area to have him close by. Well, to try and understand, well, what happened there. We say he's a monster. Right, okay, you want to use that term? He's a human monster. But there's always that human being underneath it, and I confess it. I love human beings because human beings are amazing. But then, the sky. Look at the sky, look at the sky. Now there are clouds, but clouds are beautiful too. Look at the sky, look at the stars, look at the things. There's probably someone who's... Look at it, but think of human beings. In your heads, each one of you has 85 billion cells of neurons, 85 billion. I say, well, I know that you haven't got much euros, but you've got lots of neurons. And then I say, I know someone who has a lot of euros, but only 3 neurons. Well, that's not, because you need at least 5 neurons to operate. Thank you.